Hi, this is Bob from Hobby Concepts, and today I'm going to do a video on the Grand Hauler. And this video is specifically designed for people that haven't built a Tamiya truck before. And I get this question all the time: Bob, do you think I can do it? Yes, I think you can, but I'm going to go through this truck step by step, one little step at a time, show every little detail. If you've built lots of Tamiya trucks, this is probably not the video for you. If you want to get into it though, this is definitely the video. The Grand Hauler is the best seller. It's a great truck to start with. Today, we're going to build the frame up through the suspension. And then I'll have part 2, which will be the transmission and the decking, and part 3, which will be kind of the finishing. I've selected the unpainted version. It comes in both a black finished or an unpainted version. That way I can paint it and show some painting techniques. So here we go, Grand Hauler for novices. Let's get started. So here we have the Grand Hauler. This is Tamiya's most popular kit, and several reasons why, and I'm going to go into that. But this is the box. That's what it looks like. And again, this is going to be a video for novices, so we're going to go through every little detail building this of this Grand Hauler. Now the Grand Hauler, as I mentioned, is Tamiya's most popular kit. The reason for that is they have priced it less than a lot of the other kits, and it has more things included in it. For example, it comes with a driver figure. It's the only Tamiya semi-truck kit that comes with a driver figure. It also has 2 different sets of rear fenders. It has the fully enclosed rear fenders, or it has the quarter fenders and mud flaps, both included in the kit. It's longer than the King Hauler by several inches. It's actually Tamiya's longest frame, except for a couple of their dump truck kits, and just makes a beautiful truck. It comes in 2 different versions. It comes in one that's already pre-finished in black. It's actually metallic black that's been a clear flat has been applied over the top of it, so it's a matte metallic black, actually almost a steel gray, very pretty. And then it comes unpainted. Now this particular kit is the unpainted version, and the reason I want to use an unpainted one is to show some of my painting techniques. I kind of want to do everything, so so we're going to go with the unpainted one, but you can get the kit either way. And so I'm going to show some of the things you need to build it. We're going to go through the tools, some of the accessories, and then we'll start to work on it. So besides the kit, not counting tools, what do we need to build it? Okay, first thing we need is a radio. This is a FlySky FSI6 that's been specially modified for trucks. So it has a centering left stick. We need servos. 2 servos, so there's a steering and a shift servo. We need an electronic speed control. This is a Hobby Wing electronic speed control that has forward and reverse. And a ball bearing kit. Now, while not absolutely required, I never build kits without it, and never will, and wouldn't. So a ball bearing kit is a very important thing to have when you're building. Now, these items right here at hobbyconcepts.net, you can buy this in what's called a completer package, or you can actually get the truck with this all included and save a little bit of money. So those are the main items you need to build it. You also need a battery. This is a 3600 milliamp nickel metal hydride battery. People are always asking me, can you use LiPo batteries? Yes, you can. A 2-cell LiPo works just fine. This speed control will handle it. A Tamiya MFC unit, which is the lights and sound, will also work with it, although there are some caveats, and I'm not going to talk about those today, but you can probably see those in some of my other videos. I like the nickel metal hydride batteries better than the LiPos because they're heavier, and extra weight is nice to have in the truck, and they're very easy to charge and manage, and you need some kind of a charger for that battery. So those are the items that we're going to use to build the truck. A couple other things. I always change the motor. The stock kit motor is about 27 turns, and it's a motor that Tamiya uses in just about every kit they make, but they're race cars, and it's just literally too fast for the trucks. It makes them hard to maneuver at really low speeds, and it makes them too fast, easy to tip over. This is a 55 turn motor. This is a really good all-around motor, which will slow the top speed down and give the truck more power. Now you can get motors, I have them in 45, 55, or 80 turns, and the higher the turns, basically the slower the truck. But a 55 turn I find is a really good all-around motor. And then, since we've got an unpainted version, we're going to need some paint. This is some Tamiya surface primer, Tamiya paint. This happens to be pearl green, which is what I think I'm going to paint this truck. And then a clear gloss coat. So it takes a couple, probably 3 cans of Tamiya paint to paint this truck. I've also used paint like Duplicolor from the auto parts store. I tend to stay away from the stuff like the Rust-Oleum paints and the things they sell at Walmart. I don't usually get a good finish with those. I like a little bit better quality paint. So we're going to talk about painting quite a bit later. So those are the items we need to build it, and let's talk about tools. So tools and other supplies. The kit comes with a little four-way wrench, lug wrench, which actually is the handiest little thing in the whole world. And you wind up, if you build a lot of Tamiya kits, with a bunch of these, but they're really great. It comes with some gel thread lock, which you need, and some ceramic grease. So those are included in the kit. It also comes with an Allen wrench for the Allen screws, but I didn't dig that out. Adhesives. I use Tamiya extra thin plastic cement and some medium super glue. The plastic cement you can use for gluing plastic parts together, like the interior pieces and some things like that. You don't need much. Medium super glue is you glue the bearings in a couple places. You'll use it a few other places, so you need some of that. Tools. Pair of needle nose pliers. I've had these forever. Super important. These are Tamiya screwdrivers, a medium and a large. They have kind of a special tip. The screws aren't a Phillips tip, they're I think a JST, but these screwdrivers fit the screws perfectly, and I use these a lot. I also use this a lot. It's a Tamiya RC tool kit. I'll put links in the description for all this stuff, and it has both sizes of screwdrivers, plus it has long nut drivers and some Allen wrenches, and kind of a nice handle to get in there to use them. This is really nice for like when you're putting on the lug nuts. It's easier than using this little wrench. So that's the Tamiya RC tool kit, and I use that quite a bit. Hobby knife. Gotta have a hobby knife. Use it a lot. Flush side cutters. You need a set of these, and these are for clipping plastic parts off of the tree. This is a very good set. Tamiya makes another really good one. I'll put a link to that on the website, but you can see it's flush on one side, so you can get right up against the part and get all that nib off. And a pair of tweezers. Absolutely required, especially for an old guy like me. I can't pick up little tiny screws and stuff as easily as I used to be able to, so a pair of tweezers. Two other things I always use: a muffin tin from the dollar store, and those are great for dumping out bags of screws so you don't lose them, and a bread pan from the muffin store, which is great for dumping out bigger pieces, transmission parts and axles and things like that. So I use those two quite a bit. You will see those on my build. So those are the tools. Let's dig into the kit and we'll actually get started building. So we'll talk a little bit about what makes this kit different than the King Hauler. The King Hauler was Tamiya's original kit, semi-truck kit, and the Grand Hauler came along later and they made some changes. The body molding, the molded plastic part, is exactly the same on a King Hauler and a Grand Hauler. Okay, that piece is the same. The windows are the same shape, but the Grand Hauler, the windows are more clear. The king hauler, the windows have a darker tint. So with the more clear windows, you can actually see into the truck better. So that's one of the differences. Different front bumper. As I mentioned, it comes with either these really nice closed rear fenders, or it comes with the quarter fenders like the king hauler, and it comes with mud flaps. Different front bumper than the king hauler. Different rear bumper. It has different steps. The steps are taller, and if you put an MFC in it, the MFC goes up from the bottom so you can't see the control panel. It has different fuel tanks. They're slightly larger, and the straps are held onto they're molded onto the tank permanently. It has a little different side mirrors, different marker lights. It has a different grille. It has different air cleaners. Has a different visor, even different windshield wipers and rear bumper. And then the big difference is the frame is 26 inches long, and a king hauler frame is 22.5 inches long. So it's longer. So those are the differences. As we open up the kit, pop open this box here, got the tires in it. This is our box that has all the hardware bags. And the hardware bags are all lettered. Now on the king hauler, the parts are scattered throughout the bags, so you have to open every bag when you get started. On the grand hauler kit, all the parts for the first bunch of steps are in one bag. So the A bag puts the frame together. The B bag puts the front suspension together. The C bag puts the rear ends and rear suspension together. The D bag is the transmission parts. Now, there's also this little loose shift shaft which just sits in there. You don't want to lose it because you need that to build the transmission. I don't know why they don't put it in that bag, but they don't. And then we have the E, F, and G bags, which would be basically all the finishing parts. You can see here's some parts for the air cleaners, body parts, that type of thing. Here's our bag that I mentioned. It's got the tools, got the wrench, the gel, the grease, some tie wraps, drive shaft, and there's the additional rear fenders. We're going to use the fully enclosed rear fenders, so we're not going to use these mud flaps. Okay, now instruction book. Grab that. Tamiya has great instructions. I really like them, but there's a little bit to understand them. Now, if this is your first Tamiya kit, and I'm assuming you're watching this video because you're thinking, oh, I'd like to do that, but I don't know if I could. Yes, you can. There's a decal sheet. These are stickers. You just cut them out and stick them on. I probably won't use many of these, but I'll probably use some. Here's the instruction manual for our driver figure. There's our driver figure that I mentioned. And here's the instruction manual for the truck. This is an antenna tube left over from the old days when our radios had long antennas and you'd have to string it up through here and put it up through the top of the truck. We don't use that anymore. So this hole here does nothing. And Tamiya actually now gives you a little part right here to glue up from the back side to fill that in. So you don't need this. I get asked that question once in a while. Okay, instruction book. Very straightforward. They talk about the tools you need, the radio equipment you need. It's in several different languages, but fortunately you don't need to read hardly anything. And here's the instruction booklet. Now you can see the letter A. Okay, and there's bag A, and that goes all the way to here, and then you can see B, and then bag B goes. C, and so on and so forth. So D, you open each bag when you get to that part. And we're going to build this truck completely in order, step by step, just like they show it. I'll show you a few things I do maybe just slightly different than the instructions, but we're going to go through it step by step and build it one step at a time. On the instructions, they have each step has a full-size drawing of the part that you need. So for example, that's a 3mm nut and a 2mm nut. So if you're confused about what part you need, you can actually lay the part right on the instruction sheet and match it up. How easy is that? And then they tell you, like this is E11, everything's got a part number. BA14 is the nut. So E11 would be on the E tree. Now in the back, they have a layout of each tree with the part number and where every part's located on the tree. So there's E parts, and there's E, let's see, 1, 2, 3 right there. So you can actually use this to help you find the tree. And this tree right here, for example, is Q parts. And you can match it up. So if you can't find a part, you can go back here and look on the instruction sheet, and it'll tell you where every part is. It also explains the contents of each bag, like the C bag, the B bag, the A bag, and has drawings of every bag. On the very back are replacement part numbers. If you need a replacement part, the part numbers are there. Pretty straightforward. The instruction sheet's important. You don't want to lose it. I've built literally hundreds of these trucks, and I still refer to the instructions. I still need to measure screws. I still actually look at them when I put transmissions together. So there's the instruction book. Okay, I'm going to clean off my desk and we'll get started building. A couple other things I forgot to mention before I get started. Diet Dr. Pepper and Milk Duds. Okay, those keep me going. But the most important thing of all, and we'll just pan the camera here a little bit over to companion animal. If you guys don't know me, that's Winston. He's my buddy. He hangs out in the shop, keeps me company, chews up inventory, and he's all around pretty cool. So, got to have a comfortable place to work. I use a gigantic self-healing mat to work on, and that works pretty well for me. Okay, now we're going to get started. As we get going, the first steps basically are in bag A. So I'm going to kind of show every little step here in the first couple of bags, and then I won't be quite as detailed as we get on a little longer. Shock bodies, they're going to go in the bread pan, rear uprights, metal bag. These are shock absorber parts. Okay, and then the screw bags, I'm going to just open and dump in my bread pan. And since we're only working on step A, I will dump each bag into a separate little tin. And then my parts are nicely laid out and do not roll off the bench. Okay, now the first tree that we're going to work with is this one, which has all these servo parts. Now the correct way to remove these is to use your flush cutter and put the flush side against the part and just clip them right out. Now, Tamiya has designed these parts so that the nibs don't get in the way, but I don't like the looks of them at all. So after I cut the parts out, now I've got, like I said, I've got a really good pair of cutters here that cut really close. Now notice that's not every single part on the tree. We didn't remove the two front steering knuckles because we don't need those yet. So these are the servo parts. So a lot of times I will come and check where I clipped off the part, and if I need to, I'll clean it up a little bit with a knife. I just want that part to be completely nice. Now, does it matter on these? No, you can't see them. But sometimes when we clip off parts, like a bumper, we'll just clip that off just for fun. Okay. My cutter cuts those off pretty good, but you could still maybe trim them just a little bit. And again, Tamiya has designed that part so those are on the bottom. Okay, they're always real picky about where pieces are molded to the tree, so they're in a place where they're hidden. Okay, so there's our plastic servo parts, and now we need our servos. So I've got the servos right here. And there's two servos, and there's a bag that's got some servo extensions and a couple of screws, and an instruction sheet. We don't need the instruction sheet, but the reason for the screws and the servo extensions are that later on, when this servo is installed in the vehicle, the lead is not going to be long enough to reach where we want it to go. So we have an extension here that will fit on here and make it longer. Okay? We don't need to worry about those right now. And also there's two screws in here. Now the reason for that is this servo has metal gears in it. And with a metal gear servo, this is actually threaded. Okay, now in the Tamiya instructions, they're talking about using some screws that they provide, like this. Okay, but those are for old style servos that had nylon parts here. These newer servos have metal gears, which are much stronger. They won't strip out like the nylon gears, but they take a regular machine screw thread. So it came with a short one and a long one, and we'll need those when we put these together. So the first step, as we can see here, is to set up the steering servo. Now, in order to do that, we're going to take this piece here, E11. We're going to mount a large ball joint, BA19, in it. So we go to our little metal parts, we find that ball joint, right there. We find a nut. Okay, and this nut fits in here, and the ball joint threads into it. Now, it's time for some thread lock. Now, I personally am going to be using liquid thread lock, not the gel that comes with the kit. You can, of course, use the gel just the same. I'm just used to this. I'm an old guy, I've been doing this a long time. Now, you only need thread lock on metal-to-metal parts. If you're putting a self-tapping screw into plastic, you do not put thread lock on it. Only metal-to-metal parts. Okay, so that goes down. We use our little Tamiya wrench, and boom. Okay, now we have to center up the servo in order to be able to mount the arm on it. And the way to do that, I'm going to do that with this little servo centering device. Plug the servo in, and I can actually move the servo, or I can push a button and it'll center it. Okay, so now the servo is centered up, and we install the plate. Now it says here E5 or E13. The reason for that is on the bottom there's two that look identical. Same height, everything's the same, but on the bottom they've got some printed words. This one says ACOMS and Sanwa, and this says Tamiya and Futaba. Now, those are servo brands. If you've got a JR radio, you're going to be using the Sanwa one. If you've got these servos with the metal gears that from Hobby Concepts, you use the Futaba Tamiya one. The difference is the splines. It fits right on. Sometimes it's very hard, but it will fit. Then the servo saver clips on top. Now, the reason for that is like a shock absorber. Not as important nowadays as the old days when the servos had nylon gears. The reason for that is it would absorb some impact before it broke the gears. Then we put this plastic washer on, and now we use the screw that came with the servos. Little thread lock on there because it's metal to metal. And down it goes. Use my little Tamiya wrench here, and we'll just tighten that up. Okay, I'll plug the servo tester back in. And you can see how it operates. So that servo now is going to have an arm that's going to connect to our steering and operate our steering. Put it back in the center and unplug it. Okay, now it's time to do the shift servo. Now I'm gonna use a different method to center the servo, since you may not have one of these. These are really inexpensive and they're really handy, and you just use a 4 AA battery pack to power it. But if you don't have one, you can power it up with the speed control you're going to use later to run the truck. And I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do to power up the receiver is, well, I could use a 4 AA battery pack to power the receiver, but the speed control takes power from this battery and outputs power to run the receiver, which is the way it actually works in the truck. So we're going to plug that into channel 3. Negative wire faces out. We'll plug the servo into channel 1. Negative wire faces out. We've got the transmitter on. We'll plug in our battery, and now the servo is moving with the stick, and of course when the stick is let go of, it's in the center. So now we find the one that says Tamiya Futaba, and on this servo it goes with the notch facing up. Put the servo saver on. Put this piece on. Okay, and then this little arm, we have to get a small little ball. Put on it. Little drop of thread lock. Yes, I know, radio, I left you on. It's okay. Don't freak out. And then this this has little wings right here, little notches, and there's little serrated notches in here. And the reason for that is when you drop this in, you can make this longer or shorter depending on how much travel your servo has. So if you put it all the way out, it moves further, and if you put it all the way in, it moves less. We're going to put this from the second notch from the very end. Then we'll throw a washer on there. We'll get our special screw, put a little thread lock on it. And put it in. Okay. Great. So now we've got our two arms on there, and the servos are ready to install. So I will get this all out of the way and we'll continue. So as we look at the drawing of the way these servos are lined up, that's how they go, like this, and then this bracket mounts them, and they only give you 4 screws. The 2 on this end go in the inner holes, and these 2 go in the outer holes. So you just, and these have kind of a flanged head on them. So we'll get those put in, and then servos will get mounted. I'll come back when I get that all done. So now that our servos are put together in this block, we can build the frame. The rear cross pieces and the bumper mounts are in one small little bag and look like that. And same thing as before. Just clip them off. This piece fits like that and takes 4 3x8 screws to hold it together. I'm just going to put one in there for now. Front and rear bumper mounts are also used to space the frame rails. The rear bumper mount has a curve on the top. And then we use these frame cross members, and we'll take 4 of those. Okay, and then our frame rails are wrapped in plastic. We'll just open those up. And they are marked with an L and an R for left and right. Okay, so I'm just going to use the left rail to start with. And what I'm going to do is I am going to mount the cross members in place, and they have a web, and the web goes up. So I will just take the cross members and a 3x8 self-tapping screw, no thread lock because we're going plastic to plastic. And we'll go ahead and mount those in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So there's our left frame with the cross members, and this rear box structure now is put together with the 4 screws. So the next thing we need are these 2 rear uprights. Now, just as a matter of I don't know, good practice, this actually has a front and a back. You can feel one edge is sharper and one edge is rounded. So I always put the rounded edge out and the sharper edge in. Believe it or not, even washers have a front and a back. So this encapsulates the rear cross member. It uses a standard 3x8 screw in here. Yeah. And then the screws that mount up here are actually slightly longer. They're a 10mm screw, and they were in a different bag. That's why I dumped the bags into different places. These are all 3x8s, and the 10mm were up here, and they mount in here. The center does not get a screw. Okay, then we're going to mount the rear bumper mount like this with a couple 3x8s, and we're going to do the front bumper mount like this with a single 3x8 up like this with a single 3x8. So I'll get those mounted and then we'll continue. So now we have our frame. It's got the front bumper mount, the cross members, that rear cross member box, the rear bumper mount. That was not so hard. Okay, so there we go. Now it's time to mount our servo block, and the steering servo goes towards the left side. So it just sits up in here like this, and 3x8 screw in the back. And a 3x8 screw with a washer on the front. And the reason for the washer is this is slotted in case the servos are a slightly different length. Okay, so there's our frame. Now the only task is to take the opposite side and put that on and put a bunch of screws in it. Now it's basically a duplicate of the other side. I don't recommend using a power screwdriver because it's real easy to strip things. So basically gets all the same screws, and then we'll have a frame. Now that our frame is all bolted together, it's time to move to the next step, which are these shock travel limiters. And they use some of the rubber grommets that were in bag A. Little funky rubber grommet like that. And they use these chrome mounts. The way I do it is this rubber part fits into this mount, and then it bolts down to the frame, and I use a little bit of go to your wife's craft room and steal some E6000 glue. I happen to use shoe goo, which is just a real sticky, ooey glue. And just put a little bit in there and stick this on. And it mounts with the longer part outside like that with a machine screw. It's one of those little short machine screws. So again, a tiny bit of thread lock. Put this baby down. And the shoe goo will hold that in place. Just like that. So I'll go ahead and do the other 4. The shock bumpers are mounted. So now it's time to go up to the front and do some work with the front suspension. So this bag right here has a bunch of suspension parts in it. These mount like this with a 3x6mm screw. So I'll go ahead and actually just go ahead and do one of those. I hear Winston snoring in the background. Man, he has got a good life, that boy. Okay. So we just mount those on either side. I'm just going to put one screw in it to start with. Then we need this this spacer right here. We need 2 of those. Winston. Oh my gosh. Okay, so there's a cranked piece here and a flat piece. I put the flat piece with this little ball facing away. And then there's a spacer. So this mounts like this, and it uses a 12mm screw, which is slightly longer again. And mounts up in the front here, one on each side, like that. So it gets another 12mm screw. I'll put that one in, I'll do the other side. So we've got those all mounted. Now it's time to put together these rods. We've got a shift rod here, and the ends just screw on. And again, Tamiya gives you a measurement, but they also give you a full-size drawing. So you can just lay this on there and adjust it till it's the right length. Same with this short little steering rod. We're actually not even going to use these yet, but I like to put them together just so I don't lose the pieces. And so short steering rod and shift rod, I'll go ahead and adjust those in a minute. And then we have 2 shocks we have to build. And the shocks are pretty straightforward. Special shoulder bolt, and you use one of these O-rings on it. Shove it down through the shock body. It has a Phillips head screw in the head, and then we just need a couple of these feet for it. And this just screws on like this. I usually use an Allen wrench to hold it. And that screws on until the threads are gone. And one thing they don't tell you, but I highly recommend you use a little bit of thread lock on the top, because I have had these come apart in heavy use. It's not really a shock, it's just a damper. So I'm going to go ahead and build the other one, and then we'll install those. They actually mount up here. There's a spacer that mounts in it and a bolt that goes through it. So I'll put the shocks together and bolt those on. The final step from the A-bag are these rear suspension hangers, and there's a couple of spacers here that we need. And these long shoulder bolts, you put a plate on here, then a thick spacer, and another plate, and a thin spacer. And again, I have the bump facing out, and then this just mounts through here with a lock nut on the other side. And because this is a lock nut, we don't need any Loctite on it. So we just mount one of those on each side. And that one is kind of a hard one to reach with the Tamiya wrench won't grab it, so you can use a pair of pliers. I just happen to have a 7/32 end wrench. I know it's not metric, but it works really good. So we'll put one of those on each side. I'm going to put my, I assembled my other shocks, put my steering rod in there, and this is what's left over from the A-bag. So they do always give you some extra screws, and what I like to do is just move them all over to one bin. And then when I start on the next set of bags, I'll just start in the second muffin hole. And by the time you're done, you're going to have a nice little assortment of extra hardware. Okay, I'll go ahead and put that on, and we'll move on to the B bag. Okay, so now we're on to the B bag. It's got the front axle. It's got a set of leaf springs. Front steering rod and the ends for it. And a hardware bag, which I'm going to dump in the second muffin hole, which is now B. And then a hardware bag with some U-bolts and some axles and some other parts that we'll dump in there. And this bag is the front suspension bag. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building the springs and axle and steering that mount up in the front here. So we'll get onto that. Well, the first step is to mount the springs. There's a indentation on the bottom of the axle, and again, this part has a top and a bottom. You can feel that one edge is sharp and one edge is rounded. That's from the stamping process. So I always put the rounded edge away from the work, and then these just mount on here. Like so. Only thing that's really important to do is make sure that when you tighten this down, the springs are not crooked, that you get them nice and straight. So I'll go ahead and mount the other one, and we'll tighten those up. So now that the U-bolts are tightened up, a little drop of some Loctite, and we'll mount these shock hangers. Something nice about these Tamiya screwdrivers is they have a magnetic tip, which makes it a lot easier for me with my big fat fingers to hold some of these parts. Okay, so now the instructions tell you to mount this with the shock mounts in the back, and it'll mount like this with a shoulder bolt through all 4 locations. But I don't do it that way. What I like to do is go to the next step, which is mounting the steering knuckles on. And I like to do that before I mount the part. I just find it a little bit easier to work with. You can do it either way, but I'm going to go ahead and mount that. So what I need for that are the steering knuckles. And it takes 3 of these ball connectors and 3 plain nuts. Now, a little bit of a trick here. One of them gets 2 balls and one of them gets 1. So this one gets the 2 balls in it. And so I'll go ahead and mount those and be back. So I'm going to go ahead and mount these. I've got the balls put in them. So the one with the double balls goes on this side. You can see my shock mount in the back. And the axle fits in here, and there's a hole in the axle. So then the kingpin mounts up through the entire assembly and holds the axle in. And I always drop it from the top down. Like that. And then one of these little clips mounts on here. These little tiny clips are probably the hardest part of the whole kit. If you lose a few of them, you're in trouble, because they're pretty easy to shoot off into Never Never Land. And I don't have any real particularly great tips for dealing with them, other than I'm used to them now. Okay, so now we put our steering arm together and adjust it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it together, and then I'll give you some adjustment tips here. Now, the steering rod is adjusted to match the drawing, and I'm going to snap it on here to one of these. Now, to me, it gives you these lengths, and they're pretty darn close. I like to have a little tiny bit of toe in the steering, just a little bit. If they're towed out, the trucks don't track straight. They do this when they're driving. So a little bit of toe in is good. I like these grid lines on my board. I can check how everything is square. And I'm going to need to make this just slightly longer. So I do that by twisting. And now I've got just a tiny bit of toe out, or toe in. And I'll snap the second one down. Okay, now I can go ahead and mount this using these shoulder bolts and a lock nut in all 4 positions. So there's in the back here, in the front, on both sides, and we'll go ahead and bolt that down. Now the final step in the B bag is to position the shock and put a shoulder bolt through the shock hanger and a lock nut. I already did the other side. So that will complete the front suspension. So pretty straightforward. Alright, so we've got our steering, our suspension, and we're not going to hook up the steering rod right now or the shift rod. I save those for later after we get the radio hooked up, and I'll show you why. There's also some adjustment things that work better later. So now we're done with bag B, and you can see the leftover parts from bag B. So now we'll move on to bag C. Bag C is the rear suspension, rear differentials, rear axles, lots of parts in here. Okay, so the differentials, the differential housings, we don't care about those to start with. This bag here that's got bearings, bushings, and gears, we're going to set that aside. The rear axles, this is all part of the rear end. So we're not going to worry about those just yet. We want to get the suspension built first. So we need this bag with the hardware. And we need this bag with a bunch of screws in it. And this bag. And we need the leaf springs. Okay, so that's what we're going to use to work on right now, getting the rear suspension on. The rear suspension is pretty straightforward. These 2 plastic parts just mount around the spring, and they have little alignment tabs to keep them straight, but I'm going to tell you right now, they don't keep them straight enough. So let me just show you what I'm talking about here. Put these U-bolts on, and that's just captures the spring. But what you really want to watch out for is to make sure that the spring is straight through this bracket. There's quite a bit of play there, as you can see. And if you're right-handed, you tend to torque these, and it comes out a little bit crooked, and it can't be crooked. It has to be perfectly straight. If it's crooked, the rear wheels will hit the frame. So I'm going to put these 2 together. So you can see I added this rear axle supports on there. Got one more to do. They just use one of these short shoulder bolts. One little note, there's 2 different lengths of these shoulder bolts, and the easy way to tell them apart is the short ones are shinier, You can really see the difference, maybe not on the video, but you can see it when you're looking at them. So they just fit through here. You want to get the nuts on the same side, so not that way. And then once these are complete and straight, I double checked everything, made sure it was straight through here. It looks really good. This long bolt then just holds them onto the frame, and there's a collar here that just drops through. The nuts face in, and this long bolt just fits through here. Just goes through the frame. The other side on, and then a lock nut to hold it. And that completes the rear suspension. Okay, so now we have to build the two rear axles. The two rear axles are these housings right here. And I've actually got a separate video on how to build these axles, so I am not going to build those here. I will put a link to the separate video in the description on putting these together, but it's pretty straightforward. And they use a lot of these parts that we set aside earlier to build them. So I'm going to go ahead and build those, and then I'll come back and we'll install them. So here's my my finished rear axles, and they operate just fine, nice and smooth. So now this is the trickiest part of the whole build that I've gotten wrong many times. The rear ends have a little bump here on one side. Okay, and that bump goes towards the frame. That's a bump stop, okay? So we're going to start by putting the rear axle on first, and I'll just add a little Loctite to these. And the reason I start with the rear first will become apparent here in a second. This bracket just mounts on here like this. 20mm bolts will hold it on, making sure those are the correct direction. If you get them on wrong, your truck won't run right. They only fit one way. They only work one way, but they'll fit several different ways. Now here's the big trick, and here's the reason why we did the back one first. I'm only going to throw two of these bolts in here to start with. Is that this one has also got the bumps, which go towards the frame, but you can actually put it on two ways. Okay, what you want to do is you want to have the transmission housing, the differential housing, on the opposite side from this one. Okay, so bumps down, differential housing on the opposite side. That's the way it mounts. So I'm going to go ahead and screw these all on, and then I'll come back and we'll do the rest. The next step is going to be to mount these supports, and they go like this. There's a little bump here that lines up with this side. So you use a short bolt, a short shoulder bolt, and a lock nut to hold each side on. So I like to mount all these to the axles first. So I'll go ahead and get those mounted. Now that these are all on, it takes a long bolt, a long shoulder bolt, to go through here, and then the rear dog bone, just put a little bit of grease on it. It fits in here. And then we'll put another shoulder bolt in. Okay. And those actually use, don't use lock nuts. They've got these flat shoulder nuts. So I use Loctite on those. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. And then our rear end is complete. So that's how that all fits. You can see there's not a lot of shock travel, very little actually, but that's normal. Everything's okay. All right, I'll get that hooked together and we'll move on to the next step. The final little bit I want to do in this part 1 video are the rear shocks. I had assembled those when the front ones were assembled. They just get a spacer and a bolt, and then they go through this plastic part here, and the frame is actually threaded here for it, which makes it quite easy to install. Has a little alignment pin in the bottom, and then it takes a short shoulder bolt to hold it onto the suspension, and a lock nut. So nothing exciting there. So there's 4 of those. I'm going to do all those, and then I'll come back and we'll show off the completed chassis. Well, here's our completed chassis. Got the front suspension, rear axles. As you saw, it goes together pretty straightforward. Nothing real complicated. I'll put a link in to building the rear ends. When I come back on the next video, we'll put the transmission in and a lot of the other assembly, and then part 3 we'll do all the finishing stuff. So that's kind of how that'll go. I have a separate video on the transmission, but I'm going to be redoing that. And in the part 2, when I install the transmission, I'll link back to that new video, but you may even see it before I get that done. So there we go. Grand Hauler part 1. It's the most popular truck by Tamiya, as I explained, and if you're getting started and you're unsure of whether you can do it or not, you can do it. You saw me go step by step through here, and it's no harder than that. It's one little bit at a time, and pretty soon it gets done. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel so you can pick up the rest of the videos on this, and thanks again for watching.